in January 2022, Intel made the largest single private sector investment promise in Ohio history. 4 years later, there are 162 people working on a 1,000-acre construction site that was supposed to be the future of American manufacturing. This is what a broken promise looks like when it is $28 billion big. It is the same story that destroyed Youngstown Steel, hollowed out Flint Auto, and gutted Battle Creek Cereal. From Benton Harbor to New Albany, American towns keep betting everything on corporate promises and losing. Ohio is just the latest chapter in a history of de-industrialization that never really ended. It just changed its letterhead. The announcement. On January 21st, 2022, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger stood before a crowd of Ohio officials, state leaders, and national press and made a declaration that stopped the room cold. Intel would build 2 brand new semiconductor fabrication plants, fabs, in Licking County, Ohio. $28 billion. 3,000 permanent Intel jobs, 7,000 construction jobs over the build period. Average salaries of $130,000 a year. Gelsinger called it a potential mini-city. If demand materialized the way Intel projected, that initial investment could grow to $100 billion and 8 total fabs, making the new Albany campus the single largest semiconductor manufacturing site on the face of the earth. The facility would eventually produce Intel's next-generation 18A process node chips, the technology Intel was banking on to claw back its manufacturing edge from competitors like TSMC. The crowd erupted. Within weeks, President Biden dedicated several minutes of his State of the Union address to it. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, he told a joint session of Congress, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. Those words would become, over the next 4 years, one of the most painful lines in recent political memory. Ohio's officials gave it a name, the Silicon Heartland, the largest economic development project in state history, America's answer to Taiwan, to TSMC's dominance over the global chip supply chain. The moment the United States stopped being held hostage to foreign semiconductor dependency and started building its own future on its own soil. In Licking County, people started making plans. What Ohio gave up to get the deal. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the scale of what Ohio surrendered to bring Intel home. The state offered Intel a package that would have been unthinkable for any other company. $1.9 billion in state cash, infrastructure commitments, and promised tax breaks. An additional $150 million from Jobs Ohio. Local property tax abatements stacked on top of that. Then came the CHIPS and Science Act, Washington's historic domestic semiconductor subsidy, which awarded Intel $7.86 billion in direct federal funding. Ohio followed that with a $600 million onshoring grant disbursed directly to Intel in September 2023. Add it up. The public money committed to this single private project runs into the tens of billions of dollars. But it wasn't only financial. Licking County annexed over 1,000 acres of land from Jersey Township, Ohio, into New Albany specifically to make room for the Intel campus. The footprint required removing 75 families from their homes within the planned site. Developers descended from across the country and bought up farmland by the square mile, betting on a decade of incoming population growth. Road improvements were fast-tracked. Water and utility infrastructure was redirected. School districts began drafting classroom expansion plans for the wave of new families Intel workers would bring. Every planning meeting in Licking County for 2 straight years had a single word attached to every agenda item: Intel. In April 2022, an enormous excavator punched through the upper-story windows of a century-old farmhouse on Jug Street. The family that had lived there watched from a car in the rain as the chimney came down last. They had held out hope that the city would turn part of their property into a small park. No such luck. The land was cleared. The house was rubble. The Intel campus was coming. If there's a concrete truck in the state of Ohio that's not working for me next year, I want to know about it, Gelsinger joked at the announcement ceremony. He wasn't posturing. He meant it, and Ohio answered him. The county reorganized itself to fill his order. The first crack. Construction broke ground in September 2022. Biden flew to Ohio. Gelsinger stood beside him on a stage surrounded by hard hats, American flags, and the kind of optimism that only a $100 billion infrastructure promise can generate. The optics were flawless. The narrative was locked. The original production target was 2025, chips rolling off Ohio assembly lines in 3 years. By September 2022, the first delay had already appeared in the fine print. Intel quietly revised its internal filings. The 2025 production date was adjusted. Construction would now finish between 2026 and 2027, with manufacturing operations starting somewhere between 2027 and 2028. A setback. But construction projects run long. No one panicked. Then in February 2024, Intel pushed the timeline again. The new Albany site, now officially branded Ohio 1, would not complete construction until late 2026 at the earliest. The Wall Street Journal reported the delay. The company's spokesperson said no recent changes had been made to the pace of construction. The concrete was still being poured, more than 200,000 cubic yards of it, but the destination kept moving. Then, in August 2024, Intel announced it was cutting 15% of its global workforce. 15,000 jobs gone. The semiconductor company that had promised Ohio 30,000 employment opportunities across its full supply chain ecosystem was now shedding workers faster than it was gaining them. Meanwhile, TSMC's Arizona fabs, also funded through the CHIPS and Science Act, were reporting construction progress on schedule. The contrast was not lost on the people watching from Columbus. Ohio officials moved quickly to reassure the public. Intel told the state that Ohio 1 was not affected. Construction workers remained on site. Bechtel, the project's general contractor, was still under contract and still billing hours. The silicon hadn't stopped. But something else had. In December 2024, Pat Gelsinger, the man who had stood beside the President of the United States and promised Ohio a mini-city, the architect of Intel's IDM 2.0 strategy that the entire Ohio investment was built around, retired. Suddenly. After just 4 years as CEO, Intel named 2 interim co-CEOs. No announcement was made about the Ohio campus. No ceremony. No statement from the stage where the original promise had been made. The man who made the promise was gone. The collapse of the timeline. February 2025. Intel delivered what had become the most anticipated press release in Ohio history. Fab 1 at New Albany, the first of the 2 planned plants, was no longer expected to complete construction in 2027. The new target was 2030. Operations wouldn't begin until 2030 at the earliest, possibly 2031. Fab 2 would follow a year behind that, with operations beginning in 2032. Intel had moved the production start date for Ohio 1 by a full half-decade from where it sat when Gelsinger made his pitch in 2022. The Columbus Dispatch broke the story. Intel confirmed it. Naga Chandrasekaran, Intel's executive vice president of global operations, offered the official explanation. As we continue to invest across our U.S. sites, it's important that we align the start of production of our fabs with the needs of our business and broader market demand. In other words, the demand they built this around never arrived. Ohio Governor DeWine's press secretary issued a statement. While we are disappointed the plants will not open sooner, construction continues at the Ohio Intel site, and the company has continued to tell the state the fabs will be completed and produce chips. This is a construction delay. The project is moving forward. In Licking County, they received the news differently. Tim Bubb, vice president of the Licking County Board of Commissioners, had been one of the most visible local supporters of the Intel project from the start. He had sat through the annexation hearings. He had watched the county redirect its entire planning calendar around Intel's needs. He had personally managed the community expectations of thousands of residents whose futures were now tied to a corporate timeline. Bubb spoke to the press without the usual diplomatic softening. A lot of bold promises were made about 3,000 employees in manufacturing by 2025, and as it turns out, most of those were a little pie in the sky. 162 people. As of mid-2026, 1,000 acres of Licking County farmland had been cleared, leveled, and partially constructed. The underground pipes were installed, the concrete slabs were poured, the sub-utility trenches were finished. Intel had planted 4,500 native Ohio trees, 1,300 shrubs, and 324,000 wetland plants around the perimeter of the campus. There were 162 Intel employees on the site. 162. On a campus designed for thousands. In a county that had reorganized its entire infrastructure around this project's arrival. In 2026 alone, Intel announced another 24,000 job cuts globally, 20% of its remaining worldwide workforce. The company was losing the artificial intelligence chip market to NVIDIA. Its foundry ambitions, the entire premise of the IDM 2.0 strategy that Gelsinger had sold to Ohio, to Washington, and to Wall Street, were bleeding cash. And Ohio won, which had absorbed more than $7.8 billion in federal funds and more than $2 billion in state money, wouldn't be operational for the better part of a decade. That assumed no further delays. The people who had organized their lives around Intel's arrival were sitting with the math. Developers who had bought land to build workforce housing for incoming Intel families were quietly reconsidering. Some held acreage they couldn't sell. Others were scaling back construction projects they had committed to on the assumption that 3,000 Intel salaries of $130,000 a year were coming. School districts that had drafted expansion plans, new classrooms, new wings, new hires, pulled back. The student enrollment surge wasn't coming this decade. Infrastructure projects Licking County had deprioritized to focus on Intel's needs remained unfinished. The planning decisions made to accommodate a 2025 production start were now out of alignment with a 2031 reality. From 2022 to 2024, almost every decision in Licking County planning had the word Intel attached, Bub said. Leaders pushed some economic development and infrastructure projects to the side to focus on projects that accommodated Intel's anticipated needs. Now I think people are looking at each other like, when, how soon, and when do you pull the trigger on things? In September 2025, Senator Bernie Moreno wrote to Intel demanding a full accounting of the project's status and the economic impact of the delays on Ohio. Intel reaffirmed its commitment to completing the campus. It declined to provide the information Moreno requested. On Intel's third quarter 2025 earnings call with investors, the quarterly presentation in which a company tells the financial world what matters to it, Ohio was not mentioned once. The pattern. Intel did not vanish from Ohio. Let the record be clear on that. Construction continued. The company spent $1.4 billion on Ohio 1 in 2025 alone. The fabs will probably be finished, eventually. On the campus where those 75 families once lived, under the soil where century-old farmhouses once stood, something will one day be built that makes chips. But the story of New Albany is not really about Intel's survival. It is about what happens when a community bends itself around a promise, and the promise bends first. Ohio is not the first place this has happened. Hillsboro, Oregon bent itself around Intel for 5 decades, the same company, the same anchor employer dynamic, and then watched it announce mass layoffs in 2026. Battle Creek built its entire civic identity around Kellogg's, and then watched the cereal company split in two and move its most valuable half out of Michigan. Benton Harbor, the company town where Whirlpool has been headquartered for over a century, has a 45% poverty rate, while the corporation still cashes checks from the zip code that carries its name. Youngstown lost its steel mills and never recovered. Flint reorganized its economy around a single auto employer and paid for it in water. The anchor employer promise, the single company whose arrival reorganizes a community's future, is the oldest engine of deindustrialization in American history. because it runs on hope and pays out independency. Cities have been built on it. Cities have been hollowed out by it. The cycle does not stop because we want it to. It stops when the balance sheet says it should. And balance sheets don't answer to county commissioners. Ohio is still waiting. As of mid-2026, there are still only 162 people on a 1,000-acre campus in Licking County, Ohio, surrounded by native trees and wetland plantings, slowly building a facility that might make 18A processed node chips by 2031. Ohio still has the land. It still has the infrastructure upgrades. It still has Intel's word that the project is moving forward. What it does not have is the future that was announced on January 21st, 2022. The one Biden described from the floor of Congress. The one Gelsinger called a mini-city. The one that reorganized a county's entire planning calendar, displaced 75 families, cleared a century of farmsteads, and redirected nearly $10 billion in public money toward a private corporation's chip manufacturing ambitions. That future has a new delivery date, sometime in the early 2030s. Ohio is still waiting. Intel is still building, slowly, at its own pace, aligned to its own market demand. And the clocks on the Silicon Heartland keep ticking.